Jeff spoke on Sunday, he was talking about the spirit and the soul, that the spirit and the soul are different. And people have a hard time understanding how, as people who are born again, spirit-filled, how we could still enter into sin or have demons, that kind of thing. But the spirit and the soul are not the same thing. Our spirit is the regenerated part of us that is in communion with God. God is a spirit. We are not spirits as God is a spirit, but we have a spirit. But on the other hand, the soul is different. The soul is kind of the human side of us. We are a soul, whereas we're not a spirit. We are a soul. And the Webster's Dictionary defines the soul as the moral and emotional aspect of our humanness. So the soul basically is the part of us that makes decisions. It's also clearly affected by events, our circumstances, our emotions. The soul is the part that, the devil will tempt and go, hey, why don't you try this? Your spirit man's going, oh no, I'm in communion with God, but your soul is human. Does that make sense? Yeah. I got notes because I don't want to miss anything. Hebrews 4:12 tells us clearly that the spirit and the soul can be divided, that they're not the same. So I won't take the time to read that. So as I said, people get kind of confused with, well, I believe if you're born again, you can't possibly live in sin. Believe me, you can. We've seen it over and over and over again. So we're going to kind of explain sort of how that happens. So bear with us a little bit. So if our soul can be influenced and affected by our surroundings or by events or by emotions or by what other people do to us, by our thoughts, by what comes into us when we watch movies or whatever, it must be a pretty complex thing, right? Like, it's not simple. So God made our souls so that even they protect us in times of trouble. And sometimes people go through so much stuff and they have so much pain and trauma that they can't really take it. Now, who's ever been through trauma in their life? Every hand in here should raise. And some of you, well, I won't ask you to raise your hand, some of you have been through such tremendous trauma and pain that you reached a point where you almost couldn't function, right? So our bodies are so made that when we get to the point where we can't function, it's almost like another us steps in and goes, I'll do it. I'll protect you. You won't have to go through this, and you'll be okay. So that's kind of what we want to talk about, is how the soul does that and why the soul does that. So I want to kind of read some of this because I found some information that was almost too good for me to try to wing it. But when our emotions get hurt, when our soul gets hurt, it's kind of like if we get a cut on our skin, it makes a gash. But God made our skin where it would regenerate itself and heal itself, right? So, but our soul doesn't always heal itself that way. And sometimes we can carry our pain and our trauma for the rest of our lives if we don't get help for it. If we don't do something about it and go to the Lord for help somehow or go to somebody for help, we can carry that pain our whole lives and just not get over it. And it can become so bad, our soul can become so wounded that it affects our spiritual ability to commune with God. I mean, have you ever gotten in such pain and such hurt that you just go, God, I can't even talk to you anymore because I just don't know what to do? I think we've all been there a few times. I know I have. So when we get to where our spirit can't commune with God anymore, our soul can be kind of in trouble, right? So some of this I'll just kind of read. Emotional trauma has the potential to infect our entire soul, but God designed a way to limit the damage of emotional trauma by allowing the soul to create what we know as fragments of the soul. A fragment is a part of the soul that contains the memories and emotion of a traumatic event. It's like a part of our personality that's been frozen in time. Fragments prevent the wounded parts of our soul from becoming the dominant influence over the core of the soul. In other words, they step up and keep us from being so wounded that we can't function, right? Or else we just lay on the floor and go, I'm done. Fragments prevent the wounded parts of the soul from becoming dominant. In effect, the fragmenting of the soul compartmentalizes the wounds and minimizes the damage that can be done to the rest of the soul. Does everybody follow me? Does that make sense? Fragments usually lie dormant in the soul until an event happens. Or like, if an event happens when you're young and then that happens again when you're older, then that fragmented part kind of steps up and goes, oh, wait a minute, we can't let you go through that again, so we're going to step in and protect you as best we can. Example is, if a teenager gets bullied a lot, and bullied to the point where they just want to run, they don't want to go to school anymore, they're afraid of everybody, they're afraid of everything, then later on in life, they become around somebody who's verbally abusive or who's bullying them, a fragment of their soul can step up and go, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to let anybody hurt you. Let's see what we can do about this. So that thing steps in, the fragment steps in to protect the core of that person. It's hard to explain. I hope I'm giving a clear picture. So if the fragmented part of the person was created to protect them when they were little, then oftentimes that fragment will act like a little child. And believe me, we've seen that so many times. So the soul fragment will usually assume control when there's a perceived threat to the person. Like it'll step up and go, I'll protect you. I'll give you a demonstration of this in a second. So another example, a woman said she was molested in the basement by her uncles when she was young. So she was horrified of basements. So anytime somebody would try to get her to go in a basement, she would act hysterical and run in the corner and cry like a little baby, and people would be like, it's a basement, lady. But that's her fragmented part going, I'll protect you, don't go anywhere near that basement. But then she acts like she did when the trauma was committed. Does that make sense? Okay, so similar to a fragment, and this is different from a fragment, is what's called an alter, which is short for alternate or alternative personality. Like a fragment, an alter retains memories and emotions of specific events. But unlike fragments, alters can have unique personalities all their own. A fragment will usually maintain the same personality traits as the person, but an alter can be totally different. Okay, does that make sense? I'll give you an example. Did anybody ever see the movie Sybil? Came out in 1976. It's an old book, but Sybil was extremely fragmented. She had what's now called DID, or dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder, where somebody had had such severe emotional trauma that their personality was so divided that each of our personalities had a different name, a different personality, they were a different age. And although Sybil could not remember what her alternate personalities were doing, some of the alters knew what the other ones were doing. Does that make sense? I remember seeing that movie going, that is just nuts. But in the mental health industry, they consider this a disease. Just like, a lot of things that start out spiritual can be called a disease. You can get arthritis because you have a root of bitterness. We believe as Christians that all diseases have a spiritual root cause. So whereas it is a recognized mental illness, DID, or multiple personality disorder, we also believe it has a spiritual root and that it can be treated with spiritual treatment. We believe every disease should be healed by Jesus and is covered under the blood. So we look at it a little more differently than the mental health profession. But how many doctors treat diseases as diseases? And they don't look at the spiritual aspect. They just want to give you pills, whereas for this, they do the same thing. Not saying they don't help, but sometimes that's what they do. So anyway, when a person's trauma is triggered, and we do call it a trigger, those alters kind of step up and want to act in their place. And the way some people describe it is, I feel like I'm in a car, but I'm not driving anymore, I'm in the back seat. So sometimes the person can kind of see what's taking place, and sometimes they can't. So these alters, or these fragments of personality, because they're not our spirit, the enemy looks for those, and I'll call them cracks in the armor, and he'll go, oh, I can jump that. I can jump on that, and I can lead this person way off, and I can get them into sin with that. So, can I demonstrate that real quick?
Yes, please.
Okay. Come on up, Trina. Trina's going to be, she's going to be the core personality. So Trina was horrifically abused when she was 5 years old. She had a parent who was extremely abusive and beat her and did different things, which led her, eventually to the Lord. She sought the Lord because she had such emotional trauma. But then she marries, no offense, she marries someone who ends up being abusive. So even though Trina is saved and born again, and she's done really well for a long, long time, at a certain age, and she marries this abusive man, and he begins to hit her. What does that remind her of? Her father. So she immediately shrinks back, Trina. She shrinks back, and she can't really cope. Because she can't cope, she's got to function, right? She's got to go to work and take care of the kids or whatever. So her soul will fragment and go, I'll do it. I'll take care of her. I'll step in now. You won't have to, dear. I'll step in for you. And I tell you what, I'm going to be so mean to everybody that they won't be able to stand you and they won't be able to abuse you because I'm in charge now. By the way, maybe you could drink. Trina, you could drink and that would make you feel better. I'm just really concerned about Trina feeling better. Because if she feels better, then I've done my job, okay? So Trina goes to her pastor, and she gets prayer. She seeks the Lord, and she realizes that God's bigger than all this. So Trina steps back up, and the altar steps back, and the trauma's over. So her husband does good. They're going to church, but he falls off the wagon, and he hits her again. So this time, it's even more traumatic. So Trina shrinks back, and then another altar can crop up, and this one could be 5 years old, because that's when she was traumatized. So when she's back here not functioning, this 5-year-old altar steps up and just goes, I need help, and I need my mommy, and I don't know what to do. I mean, we see this happen, and Kim and Tony are going to qualify this after a while. And Trina's in the background, in the back seat of the car, while these altars have kind of taken over, but they really want to protect her. So then this mean altar steps up again and goes, you don't know what you're doing, you 5-year-old person. Trina, if you just do drugs, maybe you would feel better. And the devil's like, I can jump on that. And then Trina, and she goes out and goes, oh, anything to make me feel better. I can't function. I got to go to work. I think I'll try this. And she steps into drugs, and next thing you know, she's living in sin. Does everybody get that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm almost done. So, like Jeff said, we're all tempted by sin. You know, none of us are perfect. But if you continue to go towards the Lord and you get help, there's help for these kinds of things. But if you continue to go that way, then sometimes sin can take you over. And demons can attach themselves to these fragmented parts of your soul. That's how Christians have demons. Now, that doesn't mean they act like a demon all the time. They can be fully functional in their life, but still have demonic attachments that keep them from pursuing the Lord 100%, or that keep them from fulfilling what God has called them to do, because they're just hurt, wounded people. And that's why we have ministries like we do to help people. And I know Hope can kind of explain from her perspective, you know, what it's like. I'm just going to let you take it because I know she's got something to say, and then Kim and Tony have got a lot to say.
Yeah, sure. Well, I have definitely been through Freedom Encounters, and I've gotten lots of ministry from Tony and Kim. Come from a really, really bad background. But I just want to honor these people for being willing to see that people are broken, and giving them the ability and the willingness that they choose to step out and listen, and they don't judge, and they have the gifting of seeing the beauty in the messes before we're actually to the place where other people accept us. They accept us right in the middle of the mess. So I just wanted to say that before I start what the Lord has given me. First of all, the Lord told me He just wanted me to break down the definition of fracture. So fracture, if you think about a broken bone or anything like that, it's like a cracking or a breaking. So what happens when something breaks or cracks? It's divided, right? There's a division. Just like the body, there's divisions that happen in our mind. Why will we think that living in this world today, that our bodies aren't immune to the sin, the fall? That's not immune to it, so our minds are not immune to that, because we live in a fallen world and we have different traumas and different things that happen to us. One reason, to go back, this a lot of times what happens is it causes disassociation. So you disassociate yourself. So there's a division there in your mind. And that's exactly what she was talking about over here, is your mind does, the Lord made us to protect ourselves. So your mind is trying to protect itself, so it does everything it can to try to compensate for that division. And in a way, it's actually a very beautiful thing that the Lord gave us to try to get us through the pain and the torment and the trauma during that. But then after that's over, we need to be healed. So one reason I feel like a lot of times the church has gotten to a place where we don't want to really acknowledge that there's that kind of division, or there's that kind of breaks in the mind, is because we think it's wrong to go back and to deal with these things. We think there's something bad about that. But in reality, we need to deal with those wounds, and we need to deal with those issues from our past, because if we don't deal with those things, how do we move forward in our destinies? So I know one specific verse that Satan has used in the church against us, and he's really taken it out of context, is let's see, Philippians 3:13. It says, "Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead." So Paul, he wasn't referring to the wounds, okay, or the cracks and divisions in our mind. He was talking about how he had obtained all these Jewish laws and was in, as far as Jewish standards, he would have been considered perfect. But he laid all that aside, and he said, I choose grace. And so that's what it's talking about right there. Now, if anybody knows my background, I come out of satanic ritual abuse. Very, very deep stuff. So I know specifically that during rituals, they curse the church to keep them bound in that perpetual cycle of wounding and that division of the mind, because they don't want the church to realize that they have wounds. Because if you don't realize that you have wounds, you're going to always be stuck in a pattern that keeps you from your destiny. So they want a church that is not powerful, because a healed church is a powerful church. Amen. So if we can get to the point to where we acknowledge and we say, hey, I need some ministry, I need some help, I need the Lord to heal these divisions in my mind, or this pain and that wounding, and be real with each other, then we can get healing, and we can step into that destiny and be that powerful church that the Lord has called us to be. In the devil, and of course evil people, they don't want that to happen. And so one thing the Lord was saying is for me to ask, for us to ask, why do I believe what I believe? To let Papa God, that's what I call him, Papa God, show me where the divisions are in my mind. And he's very glad to do that. As long as we ask him, he will show up and he will show us that. And he will heal those fractures. Another lie that the church has been fed is that when you do that, you're in self-pity. You know, you are dwelling on those issues of your life. Well, reality is self-pity means you never move past those wounds. I can guarantee you 100%, every single wound, every single wound, and every single thing that I have been healed from, I've never gone back there again. Amen. I got healing and I moved on. Now there might be something else that pops up and the Lord deals with, but it's not a perpetual cycle of going right back, of self-pity, going right back to the Lord heals it and we move on. So let's not let the enemy make us think that dealing with our wounds is self-pity. So when he heals us, we don't have to deal with that ever again. So he also gave me, I promise I I just have a little bit more. 2 Corinthians 10:5, casting down arguments and every high thing, which means fractures, wounds, lies, that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience, which means we say what he says, of Christ. So I asked Papa God, I was like, where in the Bible does it say disassociation? I've not seen that, so I looked it up, and I didn't see it anywhere. And he's like, Hope, there's another word for disassociation. Disassociation means division, divide. And he said, look at Matthew 12:25. Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. In every city or house, we are the temple of God. Divided against itself will not stand. So if we are divided against ourselves, that division, like she was saying over here, we're not going to stand. We're not going to be able to really be fruitful and walk in our fullness and walk in what God's called us to. So one thing that he wanted me to remember too, he brought to my mind, is I was eating some almonds, like candy coated almonds, and I bit down on it, and I didn't know it, but I cracked my back tooth. And so I, for a couple months, I didn't really have any pain, but as time went on, I just had excruciating pain. And as time went on, it was more and more pain. So I went to the dentist, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And then I finally went to the oral surgeon, and he's like, you've cracked your tooth all the way down to the root, all the way through. And so as soon as he took that tooth out, the pain went away. So what the Lord, I think, is trying to say is that pain is an indicator of where there's divisions, or where there's cracks, or where there's things going on. And he wants to get down there and be that surgeon and get those divisions out. Romans 12:2 is another verse. And do not be conformed. Conformed means agree. It actually is another word for law as well, to this world, but be transformed, changing thoroughly, transcending past those lies and those divisions by the renewing of your mind. So the Lord wants to get us to the place where we can transcend those lies and those fractures, but if we pretend like they're not there, how are we going to do that? So let's give each other the freedom and the ability to say, hey, I have some fractures here, I have some pain in my life that I need delivered from, and allow those parts and those parts of us that are disassociated to come up and say, hey, at 5 years old, so-and-so happened to me. And then the Lord comes in, brings healing, and we can move on. It's imperative for us to get healed. Look at my life. This is last, I promise. Look at my life. I was born into satanic ritual abuse, a lot of Illuminati background, that type of thing, torture, rape, programming, horrible stuff. They intentionally fractured my mind, so they did it on purpose. So what God intentionally meant to be kind of a help for us to get through it, they actually took that and manipulated that and tried to form fractures in my mind. And unfortunately, that happens. But look at me now. God has gotten you. It's taken a day-by-day process, walking with the Lord and letting Him heal every single part. But on a daily basis, that healing has brought me to here. And I'm not a victim, I'm not a survivor, I'm a thriver, and I'm living in abundance. So instead of us walking in that defeat, let's join together as a church and deal with those fractures and cover each other and love each other through that, so we can walk together in what God's called us to do.
That was really good. You should read her book. We have them out there now, don't we? She brought some more. We ran out. We sold them all. If you don't have her book, it's called To Tell the Truth, and it is very deep.
It's a deep read, though, y'all.
Yeah.
For fans of art.
Yeah. I wanted to add one more thing that I forgot to say a minute ago. Whereas diseases, which I talked about diseases can be influenced by intergenerational or inherited stuff. Like my grandmother was diabetic, my brother's diabetic, my grandmother had panic attacks, my mother had panic attacks, my brother had panic attacks, I had panic attacks. Some things you say run in the family, they're intergenerational curses. And I was acting out my little thing, and the altar was going, Trina, why don't you have a drink to calm you down? Those factors do play in with what the devil uses to try to get to you. They'll go, oh, well, her dad was an alcoholic. That must be real strong on her. I think I'll poke her in that area and see if she'll go for it. So I did want to mention that there are factors also that you're kind of born into that aren't always your fault. Maybe your family was into, not Mormonism, but the Shriners, what do you call it? The Masonic. Those kind of things have an influence on your life, whether it may not have anything to do with you, but it still is an influence for if you become fractured or you go through something, the devil will look for those open doors. So I just want to say that.
So I want to talk a little bit about Hope's story is an extreme story. For me, mine wasn't as extreme. I knew there was something wrong. I had a lot of gaps in my memory, a lot of timeline shortages. So for my childhood, I just couldn't remember chunks of my childhood. And so I knew there was something amiss. And I knew I had a very aggressive stepfather who did I remember some of the things happening, some of the beatings and some of the things. I didn't even remember some of the sexual abuse until I got married and had children myself. All that had been hidden, because that's the job of the fracture, is to keep it buried and keep it hidden. Does that make sense? It's to keep you moving forward, because if you had to live that thing every day, you couldn't function. Okay? So a lot of my trauma I didn't even remember until it came back to me. Okay? But I will say this, because the Lord, Jan was tapping on it a minute ago. The Lord started talking to me about we're a three-part being. We're body, soul, and spirit. Okay? So we're body, soul, and spirit, and our spirit's regenerated when we get saved. But then Paul talks about our soul working out our salvation with fear and trembling. That's the soul part of what we're doing, okay? So your body gets healed, spirit gets healed at salvation. Your body gets addressed at deliverance, believe it or not. Everything in your body is addressed at deliverance. But then there's that thing that we call soul. And he began to tell me, because even after deliverance, I was going, Lord, why am I still struggling in these areas? And he said, well, honey, think about this for a second. Your mind, will, and emotions are housed in your soul. That's your decider. That's the essence of you. And he said, you believe a lie in an area of your soul, and that lie has to be renewed. That lie has to be removed. So Jesus will come tell you the truth about the lie you believed. The problem with the lie is I can't give percentages, but a very high percentage of the time, where the lie is a demon right attached to it. So there'll be a part, because he comes at an opportunity where something negative happened, and he got you to buy something that was not truth, okay? It could be really bad trauma. It doesn't have to be. It could have been a perceived trauma. Does that make sense? Because a child saw something that happened, misunderstood it, took the lie, got a demon, got a lie, okay? So once Jesus comes in, he brings truth to the lie, to the part. Then we ask the Holy Spirit to remove the demon, get the demon off of them. Then we ask Jesus to clean them and get them whole. Does that make sense? And then they can integrate. Now, I'll tell you, society says they can't integrate. They don't know how. They know they see them on brain scans. They can see them. They know they exist. My daughter's a psych major, and so she's been telling us all this stuff. After we got the jobs, she started telling us all these things. But so the Lord says, so here's the thing. He said, you're trying to fix somebody's, because trauma, you guys, if you're medicating in any way, you probably have trauma. If you're medicating with food, workout, workaholism, drugs, drinking, if you're medicating, there's pain. They don't do that for no reason. People don't do that for no reason. And so if you've got gaps in your memory, you're medicating pain, something like that, there's a reason for it. And so he said, Kim, you're trying to get people to change their behavior. First, you have to change their mind. They have to get the lie removed and truth be told. Once the truth is healed, the emotions get healed. once the emotions get healed, then their picker can choose, their will. But their will can't choose till you fix the truth. Does that make sense? You follow my train? And so I was trying to fix people by behavior modification. It doesn't work until you get the lie removed. Right. And then you get the healing in the heart. Because the emotions believe a lie because they don't know any different. Emotions aren't bad or good. They just don't always believe the truth, okay? Because Jesus is a higher truth. And so he started talking to me about that. And so our practice has been to get parts healed. And now they say you can't do that. John, the medical field says you can't do that, but that's because they don't know Jesus. The only one that can heal is the creator of all things. And I've watched him heal person after person after person because they got the lie removed and they got truth and they found the love of their life and they got saved. Their parts, they get saved, believe it or not. You can actually have parts in you that are not the same sex as you that need healing. You can have parts that don't know Jesus. Even if you've known Jesus since you were 2 and they're 12, they were never exposed to him because the darkness came in and they never got exposed. Does that make sense? So it's just amazing to watch. And so for me, I'll tell you some of mine. A lot of my parts, I'm going to be very vulnerable. My parts were, had a lot of abuse. A lot of sexual abuse, a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of physical abuse. And mine all had function names. So when you talk to my part, they'll come up and tell you what their names were. I'm aloof. She was very aloof. She stayed nowhere she hid. I had one called control. Yes, she came because, So, because you get this, if you've lived in a family with an alcoholic and you never have control your whole life, because my dad was an alcoholic, stepfather, you always walked on eggshells. You never knew who you were going to get when you walked in the door. So you learn to walk on eggshells and you learn to try to, dot, bob, and weave. And so you get control wherever you can. That's where they say bulimia comes from, because you just want control somewhere. It's still control though. You understand? And so I'll give you a great example. I'm going to give you another testimony. So one day I had a dear friend of mine say to me, Kim, did you ever make an agreement to not get drunk again? And I was all proud and I said, yes, I did. I swore I would never do that again. That's a vow. You don't want to do that. It's a bad idea. Even if it's for a good reason. I thought it was a good reason. So then the Holy Spirit started talking to me. He said, how do I move? He moves in drunkenness and intoxication. You've seen him do that, right? He said, you might want to break that vow. And I said, oh, Holy Spirit, I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about the bad guys, So I broke the vow, and instantly I had an altar pop up. And I started having a sharp pain in my head. And I prayed, and it moved to another part of my head. And after it happened the third time, I was like, okay, Holy Spirit, what's going on? And he said, that would be control. She's a part. The one you made that you said you'd never lose control, never get drunk again, you actually said you'd never lose control again, and the demon got attached, you need to deal with it. So we walked through our process. So I'm just saying, it doesn't have to be extreme. It can be anything from something you saw. I'll give you an example, the one that's come into my head. We had a story of a gal who, kind of like what Jan said, this lady had an issue. She saw the color yellow. She couldn't manage yellow. Well, come to find out, after working with her a little bit, she was raped in a yellow room. So every time she saw yellow, it brought her back to the moment. And she didn't know how to manage it. She didn't even know what she was feeling. She just knew yellow made her freak out. Does that make sense? Not everyone has their own, because I've never heard of the parts and the fractures. So I've always called alters and fractures the same thing, but they're different. So for us, we've seen some amazing things with folks. So, but seriously, if you have any questions or you think you might be, for me, I knew when I had gaps in memory, that's a signal for me. Something's wrong. Because, one other thing, and then I'm going to hand the mic off to Tony. One thing the Lord wanted me to make sure to make people understand is when you have a fracture, say you have this amazing day, the best day of your life, and at 2 o'clock you have a really, really bad car wreck. Well, you fractured because of that really, really bad car wreck. But the way the fracturing works, it can't just take the car wreck. It takes time around it. So the best day you ever had is trapped in that memory. Does that make sense? So once you get that part healed, the good things come back too. Does that make sense? God doesn't bring the bad. I've not seen him bring bad. If he's ever brought bad memories back, it's been no pain is attached. Like I know him as factual, but not as painful. And a lot of times when you've got DID to the degree that Hope's talking about, you think it's somebody else it's happened to. It was really you. You've disassociated so bad you think that's some other person. Or you have gaps in memory like, for me, I've got a, like I won't remember doing something. I will have done, Tony goes, no honey, you said da-da-da-da-da, and you did da-da-da-da. No, I didn't. Well, thank God we're better than that now. But I would have gaps where I didn't swear I didn't do it, but everybody said I did. So that's part, so you can have moments like that that come up, but they do have different personalities. They get trapped in the age in which they were born. Born's probably a wrong word, but fractured, created. But God has got, he's an amazing, he made our minds do it. It's amazing because it's meant to be healed. And it's meant to let you get to where you're supposed to be. And so that's all my part. But it's amazing to watch it play out.
I'm going to jump in just real quick. So just to say that we didn't have anything like this here, but I had a personal situation where it was very traumatic and he was suicidal. And I would see this baby of a man sit on the floor and cry because he was rejected by his father when he was little. His father abandoned him and never came back, really. And he had such an issue with abandonment. So when his wife just up and left him, he was immediately, that part stepped up, but that part had suicide attached to it and said, well, you shouldn't live. Gosh, if nobody wants you, you're just too bad to live. He was seriously suicidal. So I heard that Phil and Marcia had this amazing ministry in Florence. And I just thought, I'm taking him somewhere. I can't let him kill himself. So I put him in the car, drove him down there. I didn't know what it was all about. And he had such an amazing deliverance. And everything changed about him. And on the way home, he said, I feel like a whole person for the first time in my life. There was no more suicidal tendencies. And he got home that night and he said, Mom, I was just praising God sitting in the middle of the bed. And I heard this voice say, hello, I'm Jezebel. Do I know you? And that was the spirit that he had been dealing with, a Jezebel spirit. That spirit was cast out, but it come back to speak to him. So I was like, I want this at our church, Lord. I want this. This is a good thing. I want it. So Ken and Sylvia Thornburg came here and did a training, which is how Kim and Tony first got trained. But I was so arrogant. Now, we made everybody go through it. Everybody that took the training, we made them have a freedom encounter. And I was like, I don't have any altars, excuse me. I'm a pastor. I was arrogant about it. I was like, I don't have lapses in thought or, I just thought I was so okay that there's nothing wrong with me. So I was supposed to go the next day. And sometimes the devil tries to talk you out of going, like, you don't need this, just don't go, you're okay. And I had a dream that night. And in the dream, me and Sylvia, the lady who was training, we were in a car and she was driving. And we pulled up in a field and she let me out and I got out and went over and stood in the field. And the car door stayed open and all these people started walking out of the car. And they all lined up in front of me. And there was little girls and people my age, and there was beautiful women and, not so beautiful women, and there was thin and there was not so thin, and I'm looking at all these people thinking, who are all these people? And she went, those are your altars. There was 15 altars, and I'm thinking back to, okay, my dad abandoned me, I'm thinking back to all these traumas going, it could have happened, and sure enough, you get in the deliverance and you go, well, there's no demons attached. This is ridiculous. I'm a pastor. So first thing I did when Sylvia's doing the deliverance, I went and stuck my tongue out and I went, I didn't just do that. She said, oh, yes, you did. And I thought, well, there was a little booger in there, just a little one. He wasn't cussing or anything, but he stuck his tongue. I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh. But since we've been doing this so long and we've seen so many things, it's like sticking out your tongue's not too bad. If that's the worst thing you do, you probably are okay. But I just wanted to say, if you think that you don't have this going on, you do. Everybody does. I've never seen one person. But the level of fragmentation largely depends on the level of trauma. People, the more trauma you have, the more fracturing you have. Some people have hundreds, thousands of altars, thousands, literally, because there's been so much trauma. So, it can go on different levels, but I'll let Tony take it.
Well, I'm going to finish up something Kim started.
Okay.
body, soul, spirit. What is unity? If we think the body can be united while we're divided internally, what are we going to do? We're going to make a mess. Part of what we see is the unity of body, soul, and spirit. Because if you're fighting internally with fractures, one scream and go and one scream and sit down and shut up, how are you going to get anywhere? You know, as Peter said, you know, I do the things I don't want to do and I don't do the things I want to do. When we get in this place, we have that argument in our heads. But when Kim and I got started in this, she started a lot earlier than I did because of post-traumatic syndrome, popping up stuff and all this, you know, having babies and all these memories coming back and all the suppressed memories coming through. You know, you don't know what you don't know till you know what you don't know. You know, I cannot remember every day of my life. Can you? What happened on the days you don't remember? When we walked through this, I'd come out of rehab in 2003, and I knew I had some problems then. And I went after everything. But there was always a piece missing. We couldn't get some things healed. Some things wouldn't stop. Some cycles wouldn't go away. You know, it's one thing to resist temptation. It's another thing to overcome it. In my flesh, I can say, no, I'm not going to go to the bar today. But I might just sneak a beer over here with the boys. But until you get the freedom from the wounding of the parts, you can't change that thinking. We refer to them as parts, altars. There's a lot of terminology depending on the ministry that's using. There's a lot of different vernacular that says the same thing. So you'll hear us use a bunch of different words, but it's the fracturing. Now, I didn't have an abusive dad. I wasn't raped, or I wasn't, you know, I had a lot of absenteeism things, a lot of emptiness, a lot of loss of understanding of what I didn't have.
Can I explain for a second? He's hitting something that you need to understand. There's two kinds of wounds. When you talk to inner healing people, there's two main kinds of wounds. There's A wounds and B wounds. A wounds are the ones where you actually, make sure I get this right. One is where you actually physically have wounds. You have bruises, you have cuts, you have marks, okay? Broken bones. Then you have the other, which are, you don't know that you didn't get love you needed. You didn't get the nurturing. You didn't get the compassion. So there's two kinds. The one is harder to find because you don't know you didn't get it till you find out you didn't get it. Does that make sense? You find yourself, to other people you see, moms connecting with children and your heart longs. You probably didn't get that. That's an absent wound, okay? So those wounds are harder to diagnose. He had a lot more of those kind of wounds, where I had a lot more of the physical bruising, marks, you know, drama wounds.
So when you look at it, when you see somebody acting out there, there's an issue internally. You know, we don't have to be, you know, Jesus didn't need us to be abused to create us to be who he wanted us to be. You know, this is the enemy's tactic to keep us divided between ourselves and the church. If we really want to see revival, it needs to start with each one of us with our own internal struggles overcome. I mean, even when Kim and I came here, I heard all this, just getting the glory, just getting the glory. What is the glory? What are y'all talking about? What's this glory stuff? How do I get, you know, it was that place where internally I had that argument going on. God's not going to do it for you. He does it for other people. You're not worthy. You're not capable. You're not, you hear all those things internally. When I went through my freedom encounter, I had to laugh at Jehovah Sneaky later on. I figured this out. It was 10 years to the date of when I went into rehab. He's telling me something. But the arguments in my head stopped. The desires that I was trying in my flesh to stop, stopped. Because in the ministry of the deliverance, it also helps the fractured parts that are ready. But now there's a walking out, there's a process, there's a continuation. There's the renewing of the mind on a daily basis. Taking the lies captive. That's part of our responsibility as a Christian to work on. He can do all the supernatural stuff he wants to, but if we don't want to go after the lies, what's he done? One of the things I really appreciate about what the ministry we have is to me, it's a very complete package. When I came out of rehab, I needed something to get me jump-started. I needed to get some of the demons out of my head that were yelling, screaming, and kicking me, because they were. But I also needed the tools to help me with my emotions, my feelings, things I hadn't had in 40 years. You know, my kids called me emotionally constipated. I was fine. I'm fine, or I'm going to take your head off, one of the two. That's all there was. But that's not how God created us. We have to walk in this place of knowing that the things that have happened to us to this point were the enemy trying to stop us, because he sees the call. He sees the call when you're born. Amen. He sees the gifts. I'm going to use Hope for example for a moment. He knew what her call was, so he put her in the worst possible conditions. Even though she agreed to the assignment, she knew what her purpose was. But the enemy tried his best to stop her. No, it didn't work for her. But it was a process of getting to this point with him. You know, I love the laying on of hands. I love the laying on of and praying for people and putting oil on them and all. But what I love to see is when somebody has a revelation, like we had a client a couple of weeks back. We went through some stuff to get him in a place, and he actually was able to walk up and see Jesus for the first time. And all Jesus did was hug him. And it wrecked him. It wrecked him. And the transformation of this person in 4 hours was just, it's phenomenal. Kim and I are trained in a lot of different models. We use a lot of models. The same result. It's all about God. He's wanting us to be whole. Because when we're individually in unity, I can lock arms with the person next to me, and we can be in unity, and we can stand under what he's getting ready to pour out. You know, Jeff looks around and he says, you know, this is the healthiest body we've had. Since Kim and I have been here in 2012, let me tell you, it went from the wild, wild west to a family. This is a family. We're sitting here having a family chat. And a lot of you are family in here. But the change has been because people are going after their inner wounds, their inner things. Because it's the inner things that come out of our mouth. And if we want to change what comes out of our mouth, we got to change what's in us.
That's right.
And everybody's at a different page, a different stage, a different walk. We can sit here and get in the glory, and I love it. I love what we had tonight. But if we can't grow, and he can't pour it out on, I love a good meeting. I love a good expression of God's love. I love the angelic realm. But what I really like is when somebody gets a revelation of who he is and it wrecks them. I mean, I can do that all day long. I can, because I know he's changing them. You know, I'm going to pick on my boy because he's not in the room. But I was watching Jacob tonight, and he got on his knees, and he was sitting there just crying before the Lord. And that just, my heart was just screaming for him. Because that's the first time I've seen him do it.
Right.
So God's touched him in a way he's never been touched before. But with it, as we're walking together, you know, people are going to rub you the wrong way. They are. Trust me, I got a few of those around me. Iron sharpens iron, you know, sometimes. But you have to look and say, okay, Lord, what's there? What happened to make them the way they are? Were they a family of abuse? Was their family an abuse situation? Was there lack? Were they kicked out at 14 to go live on their own? Were they the one that got left behind? What happened to get them where they are? how can I speak life to them? And we just have to be in that mindset of how to look at our neighbor and say, how can I pray for them? What's really going on there? Because God didn't create us to hate. He didn't create us to despise each other. You know, we're creating His image, which is love. It's the demons that are attacking people that make them the way they are.
That's right, and that's what I wanted to say. First, we have to get rid of the demonic strongholds that have jumped on people and attached to those hurting, fragmented parts. If you don't get rid of those first, and there are ministries that want to integrate all your altars without dealing with the demonic, if you don't get rid of those guys first, you're going to keep going around the mountain. So the first thing is we get rid of those demonic pieces by doing deliverance. You know, you call them for what they are and tell them they got to go, and they do. But then what we do is we want those fractured parts to feel like they're not needed anymore, and that the core of the person is safe with Jesus, and it's okay for them to let Jesus do the work. So, you know, they can always explain the process if you're interested, but what they do is they, quote, integrate all those parts. So that's why when you walk out of these encounters, you're like, I feel like a whole person. Like, I don't feel like there's little voices in my head, and you actually feel so clear and so clean that it's weird. It's like I don't hear anything. I feel just whole again, because you are probably for the first time in your life or many years, because everything that's fractured comes together.
So she's saying this, so I want to say a couple things. From my encounter, when I went through mine, for the first 24 to 36 hours, I felt like I'd been under anesthesia.
Yeah.
I felt a little odd, a little bit not myself, a little bit disoriented, a little wobbly, but within a short bit of time, I solidified. That's part of the integration process. When they integrate, it takes time for all those emotions and memories to get refiled in our brain. Do you understand that?
Yeah, that's good.
And so Tony has an analogy I'm going to let him tell that the Lord gave him, but I'm supposed to share two things. First of all, if you find yourself reacting to someone, this is what I'm explaining a trigger, okay? And I used to do this to Tony all the time, and vice versa. I'm not the only bad guy, but it happens all the time, where you find yourself, they say something and you respond extremely harsh for what they just said. You probably got a trigger. You know, like you're responding way too hard for what they said. They just said something simple and you're like, yeah, that's probably a trigger. Because you're reacting to the moment that reminds you of that thing. Does that make sense? As Jan mentioned, you're responding to the 5-year-old who got beaten down the hallway, you know? You're not responding to, and y'all, I've seen everything for, like, I was talking to someone the other day, and I went to do this to get something, and they freaked out. They had been beaten, so they're shrieking because I'm trying to get something out of their hair. You know what I'm saying? So you don't know what you're going to bump into. So that's a trigger. So that's it. And I want to say this. The only other thing the Lord really talked to me about was, and this is how I handle me, and I pray we all do this, is when I'm offended or hurt or whatever, instead of going, they hurt me, da-da-da-da-da, I go, Jesus, how am I offended? What is wrong with me to be offended? Because you can't offend me. Does that make sense? If I'm in a good place, you can't hurt me, you can't offend me.
It's true.
Does that make sense? So if I look, there's a reason I believe a lie. There's something there that they're actually tapping on a trigger. And you know what? I hated this analogy when I first got into inner healing. You know, you see somebody and you go, man, they drive me absolutely nuts. It's probably because you're looking in their mirror. There's something in them that you see in you that you don't want to see. That's really true. So if you are being offended or hurt, my first reaction is to go to self. Because you have to. Because I can't fix you. I can only fix me. And I remember the Lord telling me I had to leave him alone. I couldn't fix him. God had to fix him. I could only fix me, my reaction to him. So I started working on me. I got a 10-year head start. And I got really mad when God made him blow past me. But that's another story. I'll tell you that later. But because I had worked so hard. But you know what? The Lord told me this to me. He said, one of you has to stop this spiral downward. One of you has to quit because all you're doing is going down the toilet. And I said, well, why do I have to be that one? He said, because you're more healed than he is. So you're going to be the one that bites your tongue and holds your mouth and shuts up. And I didn't like that very much.
It's a hard one.
It is. So anyway, so those are the two things. And then I'll let Tony share his part.
what the Lord showed me was when it comes to integration, it's like having a big file folder full of notes, and you drop it. You know, they go everywhere. And the first thing you do is just kind of shove them back in there. But then they're all out of order. You got to take the time to put them back into order. And that's what the processing is like, just getting everything back into order so that it's precept upon precept, step upon step, and it's back together. Because, you know, we think computers are advanced. You ought to really look at what God did on the inside of you. Our brains, we don't really understand them. I had a slide I was going to build a show, but it'd be all right. How our brains react to different emotions, different stimulations. We just don't understand the complexity of it. But when science says there is no God, then how does this complex piece of equipment called our brain work? How does it do what it does? You know, he's got things already figured out way ahead of the enemy. You know, we're not using bow and arrows anymore. There's a lot of things he's using. Trauma and fracturing is just one of the keys that he's used in the last decades to really hammer in the church. You know, for a long time he didn't have to worry because the word was hidden. And then it wasn't believed, and then it was just the rich. Then, you know, he kept it out of the mainstream. Well, now it's in everybody's hands, and he's worried about the power we're going to have when we really understand, when we get whole, when we really have freedom, when we really know him, when we really get face to face with him. What's going to change?
Yeah, Kim had a good point. We'll have to continue this later. How many would like to hear more sometime? To me, this is like, you know, butter on toast. I mean, well, yeah, but I mean, everybody needs to hear this, but it's not something we can always share because some people would just go, I don't think so. But she was just saying, talk about eye and ear gates, but, you know, I think Hope could really share a lot of that. I'd like to have Hope come back and share a lot too in that area and some of the things that she knows and has experienced. So we're going to have her come back and minister, and we'd like to pick this up again sometime and kind of take it to another level as well.